The town of Rosewood was a small, predominantly black community not too far from Gainesville. It was destroyed at the hands of an angry racist mob. All that's left, their descendants who continue to tell their story.
Rosewood. There's a road sign proclaiming its name, but no memorial commemorating its dead.
They came on the first day of January and they did not stop burning and shooting and hanging and lynching until January the 7th.
The Rosewood Massacre was a racially motivated massacre of black people and the destruction of a black town that took place during the first week of January 1923 in rural Levy County, Florida. At least 6 black people and 2 white people were killed, though eyewitness accounts suggested a higher death toll of 27 to 150. The town of Rosewood was destroyed in what contemporary news reports characterize as a race riot. Florida had an exceptionally high number of lynchings of black men in the years before the massacre, including a well-publicized incident in December 1922. Fanny Taylor was 22 years old in 1923 and married to James, a 30-year-old millwright employed by Coomer & Sons in Sumner. They lived there with their 2 young children. James's job required him to leave each day during the darkness of early morning. Neighbors remembered Fanny Taylor as very peculiar. She was meticulously clean, scrubbing her cedar floors with bleach so that they shone white. Other women attested Taylor was aloof. No one knew her very well. On January 1st, 1923, the Taylor's neighbor reported that she had heard a scream while it was still dark, grabbed her revolver, and ran next door to find Fanny bruised and beaten, with scuff marks across the white floor. Taylor was screaming that someone needed to get her baby. She said a black man was in her house. He had come through the back door and assaulted her. The neighbor found the baby, but no one else. Taylor's initial report stated that her assailant beat her about the face but did not rape her. Rumors circulated, widely believed by whites in Sumner, that she was both raped and robbed. The charge of rape by a white woman, by a black man, was inflammatory in the South. The day before, the Klan had held a parade and rally of over 100 hooded Klansmen 50 miles away in Gainesville, under a burning cross and a banner reading, "First and always protect womanhood." The neighbor also reported the absence that day of Taylor's laundress, Sarah Carrier, whom the white woman in Sumner called Aunt Sarah. Philomena Goins, Carrier's granddaughter, told a different story about Fanny Taylor many years later. She joined her grandmother Carrier at Taylor's home as usual that morning. They watched a white man leave by the back door later in the morning before noon. She said Taylor did emerge from her home showing evidence of having been beaten, but it was well after morning. Carrier's grandson and Philomena's brother, Art Goins, sometimes went with them. He had seen the white man before. Carrier told others in the black community what she had seen that day. The black community of Rosewood believed that Fanny Taylor had a white lover that got into a fight that day, and he beat her. When the man left, he went to Rosewood. Despite the efforts of Sheriff Walker and Mill Supervisor W.H. Pillsbury to disperse the mobs, white men continued to gather. On the evening of January 4th, a mob of armed white men went to Rosewood and surrounded the house of Sarah Carrier. It was filled with approximately 15 to 25 people seeking refuge, including many children hiding upstairs under mattresses. Some of the children were in the house because they were visiting their grandmother for Christmas. They were protected by Sylvester Carrier and possibly 2 other men, but Carrier may have been the only one armed. He had a reputation of being proud and independent. In Rosewood, he was a formidable character, a crack shot, expert hunter, and music teacher who was simply called Man. Many white people considered him arrogant and disrespectful. Sylvester Carrier was reported in the New York Times saying that the attack on Fanny Taylor was an example of what Negroes could do without interference. Whether or not he said this is debated, but a group of 20 to 30 white men, inflamed by the reported statement, went to the Carrier house. They believed that the black community in Rosewood was hiding escaped prisoner Jesse Hunter. Reports conflict about who shot first, but after 2 members of the mob approached the house, someone opened fire. Sarah Carrier was shot in the head. Her 9-year-old niece at the door, Minnie Lee Langley, had witnessed Aaron Carrier taken from the house 3 days earlier. When Langley heard someone had been shot, she went downstairs to find her grandmother, Emma Carrier. Sylvester placed Minnie Lee in the firewood closet in front of him as he watched the front door, using the closet for cover. Several shots were exchanged. The house was riddled with bullets, but the whites did not overtake it. The standoff lasted long into the next morning, when Sarah and Sylvester Carrier were found dead inside the house. Several others were wounded, including a child who'd been shot in the eye. 2 white men, C.P. Polly Wickerson and Henry Andrews, were killed. Wickerson had kicked in the front door, and Andrews was behind him. At least 4 white men were wounded, one possibly fatally.
At least 2 white men were killed that night, forcing the mob to retreat. It was then that the black women and children, 12 or 13 of them, ran from the bullet-riddled Carrier home and into the woods. Minnie Lee Langley, 8 years old at the time, ran with them.
We had a aunt with us, so scrappy. She was just like a hen with a nest of biddies. She taken us to the woods, kept us out in the woods. She kept us out in the woods almost a week.
There's swamps out there.
Well, we stayed in there. Took her like a soldier and stayed out there in the woods.
You went through those swamps?
Yes, we went all out in the woods. And she built a little bit of fire for us to stay warm because it was so cold at night.
In the morning, the mob returned, several hundred strong. Inside the Carrier home, they found Sarah, Sylvester's mother. She was dead.
News of the armed standoff in the Carrier house attracted white men from all over the state to take part. Reports were carried in the St. Petersburg Independent, the Florida Times-Union, the Miami Herald, and the Miami Metropolis, in versions of competing facts and overstatement. The Miami Metropolis listed 20 black people and 4 white people dead, and characterized the event as a, quote, race war, unquote. National newspapers also put the incident on the front page. The Washington Post and St. Louis Dispatch described a band of, quote, heavily armed Negroes, unquote, and a, quote, Negro desperado, unquote, as being involved. Most of the information came from discreet messages from Sheriff Walker, mob rumors, and other embellishments to part-time reporters who wired their stories to the Associated Press. Details about the armed standoff were particularly explosive, according to historian Thomas Dye. Quote, the idea that blacks in Rosewood had taken up arms against the white race was unthinkable in the Deep South, unquote. Black newspapers covered the events from a different angle. The Afro-American in Baltimore highlighted the acts of African-American heroism against the onslaught of, quote, savages, unquote. Another newspaper reported 2 Negro women were attacked and raped between Rosewood and Sumner. The sexual lust of the brutal white mob is satisfied. The women were strangled. The white mob burned black churches in Rosewood. Philanoma Goins' cousin, Lee Roth Davis, heard the bells tolling in the church as the men were inside setting it on fire. The mob also destroyed the white church in Rosewood. Many black residents fled for safety into the nearby swamps, some clothed only in their pajamas. Wilson Hall was 9 years old at the time. He later recounted his mother walking him to escape into the swamps early in the morning when it was still dark. Lights from the approaching cars of white men could be seen from miles. The Hall family walked 15 miles through swampland to the town of Gulf Hammock. The survivors recall that it was uncharacteristically cold for Florida, and people suffered when they spent several nights in raised wooded areas called hammocks to evade the mob. Some took refuge with sympathetic white families. Sam Carter's 69-year-old widow hid for 2 days in the swamps, then was driven by a sympathetic white mail carrier under bags of mail to join her family in Chiefland. White men began surrounding houses, pouring kerosene on and lighting them, then shooting at those who emerged. Lexi Gordon, a light-skinned 50-year-old woman who was ill with typhoid fever, had set her children into the woods. She was killed by a shotgun blast to the face when she fled from hiding underneath her home, which had been set on fire by the mob. Fanny Taylor's brother-in-law claimed to be her killer. On January 5th, more whites converged in the area, forming a mob of between 200 and 300 people. Some came from out of state. Mingo Williams, who was 20 miles away near Bronson, was collecting turpentine sap by the side of the road when a car full of whites stopped and asked his name. As was custom among many residents of Levy County, both black and white, Williams used a nickname that was more prominent than his given name, and when he gave his nickname of Lord God, they shot him dead.
And then that mob grew in size, it grew in anger, and it became even more violent.
You ain't never seen a mob like that.
Fred Kirkland was a teenager when he saw the mob rampaging through Rosewood.
They went wild. There was 1,000 to 1,500 people there by that time, and they're coming in from every direction. And they was crazy. They give the high sheriff and the deputies 5 minutes to get out of sight and not come back.
They told the sheriff and the deputy to get out of town and not come back?
Get out of there. Give them 5 minutes to get out of sight.
And what did the sheriff and the deputy do?
They left there. And then they went to burning houses, killing people you never seen.
Yeah, Sunday morning they came through here, setting houses on fire. And as each one ran out, they'd shoot them, kill them. And there was a colored woman right here, lived just across here in the woods from me. And her name was Lexi Gordon. And she was sick. She had typhoid fever. And when she told her, the ones that was staying there with her, for them to go ahead and get away if they could, well, she'd just take whatever come, Well, naturally, when they set the house afire, she ran out towards the back. And she had a back door, Johnny, out there, and so she made for it. And they shot her before she got there.
But she had nothing to
do with it at all, whatever. And, it was the way with a lot of them, you see. That's the reason it was such a situation that we just couldn't understand. It was just a mad bunch of men come in here.
What do you think they got out of it? Why did they do it?
Motive, I guess, satisfaction is all I can figure it out. I don't know what it was.
Satisfaction.
I reckon that was it.
Well, the whole place was in smoke around here, And they said they had destroyed all the buildings. And said that there would be no more to live here no more, They couldn't come back and live.
Miss Langley, would you go back to Rosewood with us?
I would go. If y'all don't let them bother me or nothing like that. I don't want to go there and get hurt or nothing. Yeah.
You remember?
Hello, darling.
We brought Minnie Lee Langley back to Rosewood for the first time in 60 years. We also asked Lee Ruth Davis, Leroy Carrier, and Sam Hall, all survivors of Rosewood, to come back for a day.
Oh. Hello, Sammy.
Hey. You remember her, Mr. Hall?
Yeah. Oh, she looked just up for this Marcy.
Yeah. Oh, Lord, yeah. This is Marcy.
Was that what they used to call you?
That's right, they call me Marcy,
You look just like Miss Virginia.
Yeah, my mother.
Yeah.
I'm bringing back memory that I wished I could get rid of. You know what I mean? This has been a hobby. If you just had been here to listen to all this and see some of it, then you would have known just what it was. We lost everything.
Lost everything.
You own the land?
Yeah, we own our land, all of them.
And no one ever paid you any money for this land?
No.
Rosewood today is little more than a trailer park. You search in vain for any sign of a slaughter, for any hint of the mass murder that took place here a long time ago. Well, what did it look like?
It's a big blaze. You seen things on fire. A big blaze, just burning down. Just burning up the whole thing. Just burning up my grandmama's house, churches, and everything. They burned up everything we had. All our clothes and everything. Yeah. They burned it up.
Why did they burn everything?
They was mad.
But you were just little children.
I know it. What did we care? They didn't care.
Not many whites lived in Rosewood at that time, really just a handful. Among the few who did live here was a man by the name of John Wright, who owned the general store. John Wright lived in this house. It's one of the few that has survived. To blacks in Rosewood, John Wright was a hero. He opened his home to many of the women and children who were hiding from that mob. And John Wright did even more. He was able to get a message to the railroad that said, "The town is on fire, send a train." And that's how many blacks escaped from Rosewood, by train.
Mr. Wright got the train. And where did
he called for the train to come and pick up, the train, I guess on where it was, out in the woods. So then there was a person, something would see that we get to the train. To get on the train, somebody had to guide us to see me so that we get on the train. But nobody could get on the train but the women and the children. No men could get on the train because you couldn't trust them, you don't know who we were. So all the women and the children got on the train, and then they took us to Gainesville, and I guess some got off in Austin, but I know Gainesville.
Who was on the train? You were on the train?
I was on the train. I'll never forget it. It was night when the train come there. It was 4 o'clock. When we left Mr.
4
Wright.
4 o'clock in the morning?
That's right. And he told them, conductor, to pull the train on to stop anywhere on the road that he saw women's and children, but not men, because they didn't know who the men would be.
Carloads of men came from Gainesville to assist Walker. Many of them participated in the Klan rally earlier in the week. W.H. Pillsbury tried desperately to keep black workers in the Sumner Mill and worked with his assistant, a man named Johnson, to dissuade the white workers from joining others using extra-legal violence. Armed guards were sent by Sheriff Walker, turned away black people who emerged from the swamps and tried to go home. W.H. Pillsbury's wife secretly helped smuggle people out of the area. Several white men declined to join the mobs, including the town barber, who also refused to lend his gun to anyone. He said he did not want his hands wet with blood. Governor Carey Hardee went on standby, ready to order the National Guard troops in to neutralize the situation. Despite his message to the sheriff of Alachua County, Walker informed Hardee by telegram that he did not fear further disorder and urged the governor not to intervene. The governor's office monitored the situation, in part because of intense Northern interest, but Hardee would not activate the National Guard without Walker's request. Walker insisted he could handle the situations. Records show that Governor Hardee took Sheriff Walker's word and went on a hunting trip. James Carrier, Sylvester's brother and Sarah's son, had previously suffered a stroke and was partially paralyzed. He left the swamps and returned to Rosewood. He asked W.H. Pillsbury, the White Turpentine Mill supervisor, for protection. Pillsbury locked him in a house, but the mobs found Carrier and tortured him to find out if he had aided Jesse Hunter, the escaped convict. After they made Carrier dig his own grave, they fatally shot him.
When you think about it, far greater atrocities have happened elsewhere in the world. But Rosewood belongs to America. It's a real American horror story. The The wonder is that it stayed secret so long. Minnie Lee Langley never even told her family.
I didn't want them to know that I was scouting through the woods and stay out there all night long, out there in that cold and all that stuff. I didn't
Running
want
for your life?
Trying to save my life. I didn't want them to know just how I come along, you know, through all of this and what the white folks had did to us, because I thought it was really mean. What they did to us was mean, and did it without a cause.
In 1994, Florida provided financial compensation to some of the Rosewood survivors, but family members tell me it's impossible to measure the human cost of what happened on January 1st, and nothing in the world that can compensate for it.